From the high plains of the Midwest, I bid you good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever your time zone might be. My nod to the late and great Art Bell. I'm Keith Sharp.
And I'm G. Dressel.
And we welcome you to Life After Life, a paranormal webcast where we talk about the paranormal, UFOs, or the unexplained. And the biggest question of them all, what happens when we die? Stay tuned. Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
It seems like it's been a long time, but we can blame it on Garrett because he went to Florida.
Sorry, I had to.
How was Florida, Garrett?
It was awesome.
Was it?
Yeah.
So tell us about your adventures. And tell the people why you were there.
I go every summer. We go. It's like we call it vacation, but to me, and I tell everybody this, it's more like a team building exercise because we drive.
Oh, God.
And I got the 1-year-old, the 3-year-old, the 11-year-old now.
Are you taking a dog too?
Don't take the dogs.
Good.
No, yeah,
good.
Of course not, dude. But no, it was great. It was funny because we were at the tail end of that. I don't know if it was a hurricane or a tropical storm, Claudette, down there. And so the first 2 days, there was like double red flags. You couldn't get in the ocean. But in like typical Florida fashion, after the first day, everybody just got in the ocean anyways. It was like totally a Florida thing to do. So no, we had a good time. I'm glad to be back though.
How funny.
I missed you guys. I missed the show, man.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I hate when we don't do shows.
I know, me too. This is like the highlight of the week.
But my big announcement is we sold the house. We sold the house.
Yeah, hey, everybody, they put it was haunted and then it sold in 3 hours.
That is not true. That is not true.
Hey, did you have to disclose that? I was curious.
They didn't ask.
Well, yeah.
But I mean, I don't think it was, like I said, it wasn't the house. I think it was me.
It was definitely you. Yeah.
So we closed like
I'm so happy for you guys.
Yeah, we are too. The late July.
That cloud's been lifted finally.
Yeah, so it's not me running back and forth like cleaning and stuff. When I had Nate do the yard work.
Awesome.
So by the time they move in, the grass is going to be like 3 feet high.
That's
but
fine.
it's not my problem now. It's their problem.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, well, Pam, how are you doing?
I'm really tired.
She is really tired. She worked 2 16-hour shifts in a row.
And she's still here.
Saturday,
That's what I was saying earlier.
Saturday and Sunday. How about that?
This show's not the same without Pamela.
It is not.
Thank you, Pamela, for doing all that and then still coming on the air with us.
You can't see Pam, but she's sleeping on the microphone.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing about Pamela. She's going to be kind of like, sleepy, and then we're going to get in this conversation, and all of a sudden she's going to bring out some knowledge.
Yep.
And we're going to be like, oh, interesting take.
That is true. So we do have an interesting show today. First, let me do some shout-outs. Alita, haven't seen you in a while, but I only have one person over there now that I go see. And Garrett, you're on there. How you doing?
Hey, good. I'm doing really good. Thank you.
Let's see.
Crimezilla. Adelita, as usual.
Yeah, well, I just said that.
I wasn't a fan.
Britannia. It's my glasses, or I don't have them on. Britannia.
You need to go to the eye doctor.
Nice. Well, I'm making an appointment to go see a doctor for my eyes.
Susie Heath.
Yeah. And
one of my faves, dude, Patrick. He's always saying something funny in there.
Gotta love Patrick.
Pat. I'm gonna call him Pat.
We got an interesting show tonight. We have actually a ex-cult member who was in a cult for several years from time she was very young. And should we bring her on now?
Man, I would love to bring on Ann.
All right. Hello, Ann. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We are good. So, Ann, how did you tell us about you? We talked earlier, and you said something about you since you were just a baby or something that your parents kind of was in this thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I don't really know. I mean, I was an infant, so I know that at some point they were members of just your typical everyday Methodist church, and then switched over to what they were and what they were my whole life growing up. And so I the only reason I know they were in a Methodist church before that, because they never would talk about it, because that was sort of against the rules, was that I found my little christening dress.
Oh, wow.
One time in, my mom's old, stuff where she kept all of her like keepsakes and whatnot. And so I was like, what is this? And then it was like, oh, well, that was from before.
So did she explain then?
No, I think I was little at the time. I think it was like probably 7 or 8. So I just thought it was like baby doll clothes,
Right,
and I
for
wanted
sure.
to know if I could borrow it to put on my Cabbage Patch.
Right, for sure.
So, and didn't fit my baby doll right. So I was like, I don't understand why, because I think my mom was like, oh, you can't play with that, and I was like, but why? You know?
Right,
and so
right.
It was one of those like, that was yours when you were a baby, and I'm saving it kind of a thing. And so I didn't really even put that together until I think I was in my late teens, and my sister said something about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I totally had blocked that out, like didn't remember that at all. And,
Right.
So yeah, I didn't really, I don't know how they went from, well, I was going to say, I don't know how they went from normal to that, but I think that's kind of the big misconception about cults is that people, when they hear the word cult, they all think like, oh, Jim Jones, we're going to drink the Kool-Aid and wear funny clothes and live on a commune. And,
yeah, for sure.
And the truth is, it's so much more insidious than that. It's the same as like abusive relationships. You know, if you walk in and on a first date and somebody hauls up and hits you, you're never calling that person ever again.
Right, for sure.
And so when you first meet them, they're the nicest, kindest, most like overly abundantly loving person. And culture's the same way. When you walk in the door, they're like, it's so good to have you. Oh, where are you from? It's so nice to meet you. And they just love bomb you essentially and make you feel like, and make you feel like, oh, these are just wonderful people and such a wonderful group. And it's where I actually came from. Like when I was little, when I was a baby, we were there. And at the time, from what I've been told, at that time when I was a baby, it was a pretty normal church. Everybody sort of did their normal thing. They had a Christian school there, and I use the word Christian very loosely. And I want to make it very clear that I don't have anything against Christians, but I would not qualify them as Christian. So that's why I say that. But they were pretty your standard run-of-the-mill, essentially, white people church, it was just kind of whatever. And then we had moved away to another city for my dad's job for several months, almost a year, I think. And when we came back, and I was like 3 at the time, so I remember kind of coming back, but I don't remember, the church at the time. And when we came back, that's when things had really taken like a spin. And it kind of blows my mind that my parents stayed at that point, because things really kind of went downhill from there. Like they had, the pastor of the church that was there when my parents left was still there when they came back, but he had hired on some other people, and those people were sort of the extremists, if you will. And they sort of took the lead in kind of funneling it into what it became, I guess.
Is that something that you noticed coming back as like, however 3 years later? Is that something you noticed then? Or is it something that you noticed in hindsight?
Yeah, I don't know how old I was when I think it was like 2 or 3 when we moved away. And so when we came back, I was 3 or 4. Like we were only gone for like about a year.
Dang.
And I remember like moving back, and I remember, going to the church then, but I don't remember it before that time because I was too little. And so my earliest memories are actually at the church in the other city that we were at. And so when we came back is when I kind of started to have memories of again, I'm using air quotes, church.
Right.
So but I have older siblings that told me that it was more normal before we moved. So, and so that's kind of how I know.
So if you don't mind me asking, are your older siblings still involved in the church?
I know for sure so there's 3 older siblings. 2 of them are not, and one of them is, to my understanding. I actually don't speak to that one, and so I don't know, but the other 2 are not. They actually, one of them got out long before I did, and then the other one got out shortly after I did.
Okay. Awesome. And did you guys know people like when, I guess coming up, like let's say like when you're 15, 16, 17 years old, did you know people that were like defecting from the church?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. So when I turned 18, essentially all of my friends just sort of left. Everybody but like my closest friends. I had 2 really close friends in the church, and they were still there, but everybody else left. Everybody my age, and I was that girl that was like the one who like liked to climb trees and catch frogs and whatever. So I was friends with more of the boys than the girls, because especially in that cult, like if you were a girl, you had to be feminine, air quotes again, and girly. And so I was the one always got in trouble because I was playing with the boys, and I was, going behind the church with the boys. It was so scandalous. We were like 9.
Oh no.
It was just crazy. But So I remember when all the boys started leaving, I was like, what's going on here? But nobody really talked about it. It was like people would just not come to church one day, and then you were like, I haven't seen them in a while, and you would ask, and they would be like, oh, nobody would give you any kind of straight answer.
So no one ever pulled you aside and said, hey, you need to get out of this thing.
Yeah, not really. My oldest sister, she's the one who left kind of years before. She was the one who was kind of like, this is not good. You need to get out. But it took so long for her, like once she got out, to kind of realize and get, kind of start that healing process, and then to try to pull somebody out of a cult is a unique thing. It is like trying to pull somebody out of an abusive relationship. Like you see things that are messed up, and you know that it's not normal, and you might even disagree with it. In fact, most people do disagree with a lot of it. But then you go like, oh, but there's terribleness everywhere, and like, but they love Jesus, and I'm essentially, people never say like you're going to go to hell if you leave, but essentially they teach you're going to go to hell if you leave. So you're just afraid to leave. So,
well, they teach you
so
that,
it's really like.
They teach you, like, if you do something wrong, like go behind the school to catch frogs with boys. So they use fear, right?
Yeah,
and
that's what I was getting ready to say. It's very fear based. So was there was there any repercussions for you going behind the church for the boys? Did you get a good Did you get a good talking to? Or
There would have been, but the problem with me, and I was always, it's so funny because I was the bad child. And like now looking back as an adult, I never drank, I never smoked, I never did drugs, I did not like fool around with boys. I never did anything when I was a teenager. I never went to parties. Like I never did anything. I was such a good kid, and not even because of the church, but just because I didn't want to. Right. I had no interest in it. Yeah. And so, but I was labeled the bad kid. I was always in trouble. And it's so funny to me now, and even my siblings were too. We were the poor kids. Right. And so, since we didn't give a lot of money to the church, our parents didn't have any pull, and so we were the bad kids. But I also, because I had been given that label of being the bad child at such a young age, I mean, like first grade, I finally, when I got to be about 12, I was like, you know what? If you think I'm bad, you're going to see bad. And I just did not care. I told off so many grown adults as like a 9, 10, 12, 13-year-old child that it just makes my mouth drop to this day. Like I was not having it. And fortunately for me, my mom was very much a follower. My mom was like, oh, you need to do what you're told. Right. But my dad was very much, and it's, I think really the only reason we stayed for so long is because my dad he worked a lot, and he did not go to church with us a lot. And he was not as involved in it as my mom. And so he didn't see a lot of things.
Got it.
But my dad is very like, he's definitely conservative and all the bull crap, but he's also very, very stubborn. And so if you could meet my dad with the same amount of stubbornness that he could give to you, he would just drop it. Right. He was like, you're as stubborn as I am. Nobody's winning this argument. So I'm just going to walk away now. And so I was sort of allowed a little bit more freedom. And also I was the youngest. So my parents were tired, when they got to me. And so I would just mouth off, and then I'd come home and my mom would be like, when I was really, really little, I would get in trouble. But it just came to a point where I was too big for them to physically control. And so they just kind of had to go wail, and just kind of let it ride. Because we were really poor. It's not like they had anything, they couldn't ground me from anything. We didn't own anything. And I didn't, so, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot that they could do. And, fortunately, like I said, my dad was real, he was kind of like, if you believe it enough to, my parents taught us that there are some things worth getting a spanking for. And if you believe it enough to stand up to an adult who could really, they believed in corporal punishment and all that. If you believed it enough to stand up to an adult who would do something like that to you, then you believed it. And maybe it was not worth having that argument. And so that's kind of how I got away with,
that's interesting,
with doing what I did, with being best friends with the boys and climbing the trees and all of the things.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting that you brought up like the money factor too. So essentially what you're saying is the more you can tithe in that environment, the more power you wield in the actual organization.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the church had, they had a Christian school, and that's where we went, as kids. And so quote unquote private school. I hate to call it private school because I don't want people associating church schools with private schools. Those are really, truly two very different things.
Right.
Church schools do not have to be state accredited, so they don't actually have to teach you anything. And so, you know, you had to pay for that though, because essentially like it wasn't public funded.
Right.
And so because my parents didn't have money to pay our bills sometimes, or they didn't have, my mom worked at the school to help pay for us to go. But we still had to pay for books and stuff. And I remember there was times when like my parents couldn't afford to pay for the books. And so we were everybody knew we were poor and we didn't give money to the church. And the big thing was tithing. I mean, it was like, if you don't give above and beyond your tithe, and they would always say things like, you can't outgive God. So give all of your money to us and somehow your light bill will be magically paid. And so we were so poor. My parents literally could not put food on the table.
Wow.
But they didn't want to miss a tithe to the church. So we would go hungry so that the church would have its money.
Well, that checks off one of the boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really true. And the funny thing is, so my parents were involved in it, but nobody else in our outer, family was. So nobody, like no grandparents, no aunts, uncles, nothing like that. And I remember my grandfather always kind of having an issue with the church when I was a kid. And I never really understood why. And now I know it is because he had to watch his grandkids go hungry and know that my parents were giving money to the church. And he was like, and he was a religious man himself, but he was like, you take care of your family first.
Right.
Always your family first.
Yeah,
and
God would want you
now
to do that.
yes. And now as an adult, I look at that and my mind is just kind of blown because I feel the same way. Like I would, I would love to give to charity and help out with things, but my kids are going to be fed.
Well, doesn't that kind of like put it in perspective though? I mean, knowing like me imagining my parents being in a position where they were willing to give the church something over their own kids. Like I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows you that pool that they have. Hey, we haven't even said the name of
the church.
So the church I went to was called Maranatha.
And
there were.
Okay, sorry.
There are several churches that are associated like in that same denomination. I hate to call it that. Again, I hate to qualify it as like it's a religious place.
For sure.
Because I don't want to insult people who are truly religious.
Right.
And of course I had to make it, where it was complicated to say and spell. But so that's where it was.
Was it part of the IFC?
Or
IFB.
IFB.
My bad. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right.
So it was a part of the IFB?
Oh yeah, and very proudly. I mean, it was one of those. Literally, this is the tagline, and they would preach this. It's so crazy. We're independent, fundamental, King James, 1611 King James Version, Bible believing Baptist. If you were to ask.
Wow. See, because that was going to be one of my questions, is because, and I grew up Catholic, right? I'm Catholic, and so but my mom's side of the family was Southern Baptist, so it's really kind of interesting. But I had never heard about it until I started doing the research.
I didn't either.
And then I realized, wow, like how have I not heard about this? They have a church in our hometown, Keith.
I know, and another one nearby.
It's so they're very nearby.
Are they all the same, Ann?
Yeah.
And are most? Is there any good?
So they will tell you that they're not, because that's what the independent is supposed to mean. That they're not so like the Southern Baptist has like the Southern Baptist Convention. That's the board that governs the churches, that decides like where the missionary dollars go and where what vacation Bible school curriculum will be and all that.
Right.
But the independents don't. They decide all of that independently within their own church. So each individual church, whatever money they get, they decide where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So if they want to give it to the pastor or to the missionary, that's up to them,
Right.
But so they won't say that they're related or associated, but they are. All of the like youth activities, like there was always like youth conferences and conventions and stuff. All of the independents get together and they do that stuff. It's just that each one sort of governs themselves, which is also a huge problem because you have no checks and balances.
For sure.
We all know, I mean, as of recent, you guys have probably heard the Southern Baptist Convention is under fire for a lot of terrible things. And that is with having a board that's like governing and checking in. And, imagine They didn't have anything.
Right. Yeah.
And it was only up to one man who led the church to decide what happened.
Right.
And if that one man's a good man, it might be a great place to be. If that one man has any kind of sexism or racism or anything, and then he's surrounded by other men who are even worse than he is, feeding into that ego, into that belief, it can get really bad really fast.
Yeah, and we were talking about that a lot leading up to the show, like how quick these things can happen. And I thought it was interesting earlier when you said, really, you were only gone for like a year and a half. You were gone for like 15 months, and you came back, and there was already a noticeable change. So when do you think that you? Well, first off, should we ask some questions about like the inner workings of the cult?
Yeah, one question I was kind of wondering is like, was there a point when your pastor, say, had his own doctrine of the Bible? In other words, kind of twisting things around to make it meet his needs?
Yeah. So it's funny that you asked. Definitely. I was little at the time, so I don't know what all happened or what all went down, and I certainly don't want to judge anyone's parenting or their family because, things happen. But in our belief, they kind of went by, again, the 1611 King James, if anybody can even understand that nowadays, right? But they believed that, like, if the pastor had to be, he had to be, only could have had one wife, obviously, so he had to be straight.
Right.
He could, he couldn't be divorced. If he was widowed, that was fine. But but one of the things is like his kids had to be essentially well behaved, which is a huge joke because I don't know if you've heard the jokes about preachers' kids, but none of them are well behaved. So his own children had some issues when they were teens. And again, I was little at the time, so I don't know what went on, and obviously it wasn't talked about in the church, so it wasn't like anything anybody would know. But he should have been removed from his pastorate position due to the things going on in his own home.
Right.
Because essentially the deal was if you couldn't handle the problems at home, they basically said it like if you couldn't handle the problems at home, you didn't have a right to handle the problems at church. My opinion is that if your home is falling apart, you need to concentrate on your home. Any other parent, like if your kid is in crisis, you drop everything and you take care of your kid.
For sure.
Right.
And that's not a selfish thing. That's what you do for your family. That's what you do for your children. But it was seen as a negative there. So for him to resign from the pastorate or be removed would have been such a shameful, horrible thing. And so basically it kind of went on by a vote, and the people in the church, that were loyal to him, didn't want to see him shamed and didn't want to see him, have that mark of, scandal or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so they allowed him to stay. And the funny thing is the pastor himself was actually, at least from my experience, now obviously everybody has their own experience and story, but I never really experienced a ton of negative directly from him. It was always from his second in command, then his the evangelists and the missionaries and the person he put over the Christian school. And it was always just the men around him that I had such terrible experiences with, and really that my siblings did too.
So kind of ran like the mafia.
I don't think at his heart, I don't think at his heart that he was actually that bad of a person. In fact, I think at his heart, he was actually a very good man, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But he was somebody that, I don't know if he was insecure or if he did have some of those more like, tendencies toward like, wanting to be a little sexist and whatever. And so being around all those other people, and one wrong man can always find a friend, essentially.
Yeah.
And
Right.
he found some friends, and they sort of
Influenced him.
They sat on that power. Yeah.
And ego has to play a role in that.
Yeah. And again, I don't know what the situation was with his household. I truly, interestingly enough, when I was, I don't remember how old I was, but when I was grown at one point, he finally had me, he kind of had a meeting with me, and he told me, he said, he essentially apologized for the way he treated me my whole life.
Wow.
And the things that went on and things. And interestingly enough, he actually passed away soon after that. And a lot of kids who sort of grew up when I grew up and were in the church and everything, they did not really have that experience or have that opportunity. And so they still kind of had a lot of either guilt feelings or hard feelings, when he passed. And fortunately for me, I was able to sort of hash it out with him and really have an honest conversation and let him know, like, you let my family be abused because we were poor is essentially what I told him. And he kind of said, I didn't even realize, that I had let it happen, basically.
Right.
But he apologized for it too. He didn't just say, well, sorry, just didn't notice you there. But so honestly, like, I have no really ill feelings toward him personally. It's definitely the men around him. So, like I said, I know some things that he did, specifically things that he did. They were actually very, very good things that he did for some people that I love very much. So, I mean, but also he let things go on that he shouldn't. So, I mean, I don't know whether that was him just not wanting to stand up or if that was, I don't know.
So was there a lot of, like we talked earlier about, I've been watching specials on it, and where they made this poor girl stand up and shame herself in front of the whole congregation.
So terrible. Is it Tina Anderson?
That was, that was really common. And it's interesting because as a parent now, like, I look back on that and I think, like, oh, the horror, the thought of if my kids did something, and whether, even if it was a terrible thing, basically the idea where I came from, again, all these churches kind of operate on their own rules, so they change the rules constantly too. Like, it's always ever changing. But when I was a kid growing up, it was sort of like, if everybody didn't know about it, then everybody didn't need to know about it, was essentially their thinking. When it came to kids. Now, adults, if everybody knew about it, didn't matter, we'd still hide you. But when it came to kids, if a teenager did something that they, quote unquote, weren't supposed to do, and as for girls, that could be, you did nothing wrong and got slut shamed, and so now you have to apologize. But if everybody didn't know about your sin, we weren't going to advertise your sin, basically. And so the only time that I remember something similar to that happening was when basically some teenagers went off and did things teenagers do. And everybody sort of found out about it, talked about it, and 3 of them had to stand up in front of the entire congregation of church and admit everything they did, not in graphic detail, but they had to tell what they did in enough detail that everybody knew what they did. And they sent all the little children out. Everybody who was like below teenage had to like leave the room at the time. That kind of gives you an idea of how much detail they had to share.
Wow.
And then they had to apologize for it in front of the entire church.
Wow.
And
how horrible.
Yeah. And I mean, it was crazy because I just remember feeling so sick the whole time. And now, the parents of some of those kids, one of their biggest regrets, how they just let somebody tell them that their kid needed to be shamed and like publicly humiliated like
what
that.
The hell
and as
is
a parent
that? Can you
myself,
imagine?
it's just like, that's the level of like control that the church has with you, that as a parent you would let your kid go through that, thinking that they're going to go to hell if you don't.
I can't even imagine, man. I can't imagine.
No, they truly believed it.
That's the thing. That's
the problem.
I think that's what's so. I hate to use the word fascinating, but it is somewhat fascinating about like this situation. Is it's almost kind of like organic in a way, right? It can happen quickly, but organically. Like, I think it's interesting that you pointed out the fact that they have conventions. Because that's when you like indoctrinate people. I mean, like Hitler used to do it in the stadiums at night with the, he giving the speeches and stuff. But that's a way to take a bunch of these independent, air quotes, churches or congregations and bring them to one spot, teach them something, and then disperse them back out into their congregations. Yeah. So essentially, like the video you're talking about, I think her name was Tina Anderson.
Yeah.
Like that, what Ann experienced was that, but they put the kids outside. They tried to be responsible.
I don't even think they did that with
that's what I'm
with
saying.
Tina. Yeah.
So you see it happening in two. They're supposed to be independent, but these situations, that's not like a normal thing.
No.
Like, that's not a normal aspect of human life, is to make a kid stand up.
The horrible thing, too, is like in some of these situations with these girls who were molested by church members, they said, well, Tina or whoever was wearing a short dress. Or,
right.
Or, so they blamed it on the girl, and the man is molesting this poor young girl. And so they justified it. And she was one that she had to stand up, and she said, this day it still affects her. It made her feel shameful. It made her feel dirty. And they would constantly tell these girls, like, no man is going to want to ever be with you again because you had sex with this older man. It's like the older man threw her in the back, and it just is horrible.
Which marks a massive box.
Yeah, we had, so they, there was actually a situation like that with a boy at ours, which was worse because already if boys are sexually abused, it's already stigmatized by society so much.
Right, for sure.
That is not talked about almost ever.
Right.
And, even by people, just normal people. But in the church, that was not a thing that could happen. Boys could not be assaulted. Boys could not be raped. That was the belief of the church.
Right. Yep.
So there was a boy that was very young. He was a teenager, but he was a young teen. And he was sexually assaulted by an older, much, much bigger teen boy because he was a kind of a scrawny kid.
Mm-hmm.
And they came back and said that he had sex with this boy, and he had to apologize in front of the whole church.
Oh my God!
And he had been sent off to a boys' home, and that's actually where it happened. And he's never been the same, ever.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Yeah, and to this, I didn't even put it together that is what had happened to him until I was, so much older. So, probably until 10 years ago, maybe. It was just, and then it was like, oh my gosh, it wasn't his choice. He was just a little kid, and I'm just like, but they taught us that. They told us that he chose this, and it would, and even if he had, and the funny thing was, again, if he was not even at the church at the time. He was away in another city, in another town, at this boys' home. So how did everybody find out about it, first of all? And second of all, why did he have to say something about it? Because the whole church didn't know. My parents didn't know until he got up there and said something.
Well, you see that, and like earlier I was talking to you about ISIS.
Yeah.
The way ISIS operates, the way that they, you turn on them, they're going to make an example out of you and silence a shit ton of people, right? Yeah. And so you can imagine all the kids, the young impressionable minds that are sitting in that church when he's having to talk in front of people like that. Yeah. That are saying, oh my God, I don't want to be, that's trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma.
Well, especially kids in their developmental psychology at that age, that's just horribly damaging, right? The
church was extremely homophobic.
Yeah.
And so then he's thinking that something's wrong with me because this boy, did this to me. And so, it's just shame on top of trauma, on top of shame, on top of trauma. It's just, I don't know how you deal with that. Therapy would be the only way, but by the time, he was an adult, he was already so far gone because of all of it. It just,
I was just gonna say, so Ann, did they try to keep outside influences from you guys, like say, we don't want you watching TV, don't listen to secular radio, or
we were not allowed to listen to secular music or contemporary Christian music because that was of the devil. That music has a beat. If you can dance to it, it's of the devil.
That's exactly what that. That's
exactly.
Devil
is clever.
Yeah,
the devil is clever.
And that's exactly what
I'm going to make contemporary Christian music.
What she just said. The girl, the one of the girls said that she said anything that had a beat to it, we couldn't listen to.
God forbid.
They could show you. They could show you a verse in the Old Testament about how drums were bad.
You're going to hell.
And the old,
oh my God!
A lot of Christian denominations like Southern Baptist, even, and now old school Southern Baptist, I don't know, but nowadays when you go to Southern Baptist, most of their preaching and stuff is out of like the New Testament, talking about Jesus and the disciples and whatever.
Right.
We were hardcore Old Testament,
and that's common with IFB, right?
And that's scary.
If you know anything about the Old Testament, it is terrifying.
Bananas.
It's war and bloody chopping people up and throwing, mailing body parts to your enemies. Right. Terrifying.
Yeah.
And even one of the verses, they talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, and it says if you turn around and look, I'm going to turn you into a pillar of salt. Well, anybody you say don't turn around and look, what are they going to do? It's like don't stick that bean in your nose.
My favorite part of that story now. My favorite part of that story now is that Lot. prior to that happening, Lot, who was the guy who was in Sodom and Gomorrah that the angels came to save, an angry mob comes to his house the night before and wants to like kill him, and he says, "Here, take my virgin daughters instead." And his daughters, first of all, weren't virgins; they were both married. But he says, "Take my virgin daughters instead of killing me," to save his own skin. And then when they go to leave the city, the angel says, "Don't turn around," and his wife turns around, so she ends up a pillar of salt because he's godly.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of mental gymnastics
I know.
does it take to think a man who would sell his daughters to an angry, murderous, rapist mob?
Right.
Like, what?
Do you think that that's like?
It's
do you
the
think
Old
that-
Testament's just so
Well,
crazy.
I was gonna ask, like, is that not like strategic by this
Sure.
organization though?
Well, I think it's. I mean, I think the people who wrote the Old Testament, it was just so they could control the masses, you know, and
Right.
you can control
They could
masses
control
by
the masses
fear.
and they could control the
Right.
women. Because if
Absolutely.
you-
Right.
I mean, everything in the Old Testament, the only female, I mean, I think the funny story is, I think the only female, really, there's like two of them that I can remember that anything is nice is ever said about. One of them is Esther the Queen.
Yep.
And the other one is Rahab the harlot, of all things.
Wow.
And that cracks me up too, because, everybody, you can't slay the people, but she saved the Christians, so she was a good person. Like,
Right.
what?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so
But
much
yeah, so, I mean,
contradictory.
Yes, and it was that way in the church too. Everything, like when Facebook first came out, Facebook was only, predators and child molesters and devil people used Facebook. And then a week later, the pastor who preached that had a Facebook. I mean, I'm not even joking. That's seriously literally what happened.
I'm glad you brought that up because, like, one of the things Keith and I were talking about in advance is I asked him, I said, because I grew up like in the 90s, and I remember obviously, David Koresh, is that his name?
Yeah.
And then obviously 97, was that when Heaven's Gate was?
Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, 97. So
Yeah.
I was asking, like, Pamela and Keith, do you think that whenever social media began that there was like did your organization not your organization but did this organization see that as a tool?
Probably
no,
not.
they saw it as a threat.
Yeah.
It was a threat because it's a way to communicate. It's a
Right.
way to be informed. When Facebook first came out, nowadays I don't know, people talk about, arguments on it all the time. But when it first came out, it was more just like sharing information and like talking to your friends and sharing articles that you read that you thought that were interesting. And education, like I said, we were not allowed to go to public school. You had to go to the Christian school at the church because A, you have to support your church, but B, if you go to public school, it's of the devil, it's humanist, and you're evil, and all these things.
Wow.
So we had to, it was just, everything had to be so controlled. And so the only information we could get was the information they gave us, essentially. College was bad. College was not anything that I ever believed I could have or go to. It was not, basically, they would make fun of college,
Yeah,
and they would,
you might drink and dance.
yeah.
right.
You might learn something.
And statistically, according to them, and I don't know if this is a true statistic, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was somewhat true, that most college kids end up losing their faith in religion and all of that thing, and sort of leave religion when they get into college.
Right.
And so they didn't want you to go to college because that's education.
Well,
and they literally would say they could educate the God out of you, which I find hilarious now. But at the
Right,
time,
and then
it's a terrifying thing.
The friends around you also is a big influence on what the hell are you doing?
Right.
And might bring it to your attention where you're just like, okay, I don't want to go back to that church anymore.
For sure.
Yeah. So they had a college, but it was an unaccredited. They do, and it still exists. There's several of them, again, in the country.
Right.
It's an unaccredited, quote-unquote, Bible college, so you can spend a whole lot of money to get a degree that no one will count.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
So what about the television? Did they say not to watch television?
We could watch, because I know there's some Pentecostals who don't, believe in having television. We could watch television.
But they really couldn't control that.
It was very back and forth. So I remember when we were really little, and everybody's parents were different. So it depends on who your parents were. When we were really little, we could watch Saturday morning cartoons and whatever, and Care Bears, and my brother watched whatever, G.I. Joe, He-Man, whatever was on, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then, like, as we got older, it was like, oh, that's of the devil. Oh, that's of the devil. And I
Right.
can't even remember. Like, we could watch Aladdin. We could watch the cartoon Aladdin. And then one day it was like, suddenly everybody realized Jafar was the sorcerer and sorcery is of the devil.
Yep.
And no longer could
God.
watch Aladdin.
Just like the Harry
Then,
Potter
2
thing.
years later,
Jesus.
somebody who came in who had a lot of money really liked Aladdin. So then we could watch it.
So you justify it.
Boy.
And it
That's
was literally like that
hilarious.
with everything.
It's
It was
not
like that with
funny.
everything.
I shouldn't say that.
The only thing that didn't change was that girls always had to cover up, but everything else was flexible.
Yeah.
Just depended on what kind of mood everybody was in that day. And so it was really, as a child, it's really hard to keep up with, for sure.
So, like, so I got 2 questions for you. I'll start with this one. When did you finally decide? Because to be in this situation at 6 months, that's really young. So at what point did you finally decide, like, this is definitely something I need to get away from?
Well, so for years, like, I was there until I was an adult, unfortunately. And for years, I was doing the whole, like, why is everyone leaving? And then after I kind of was like, I disagreed with so many things. Even as a child, you're so over sexualized and over, it was crazy. And I remember just always disagreeing with so many things, even as a kid. But it wasn't until I saw them trying to teach my children those things and trying to be the same way with my children, trying to tell my daughter she couldn't go to college.
Right.
And trying to tell, my daughter that she needed to cover up, but my son could wear shorts, but she couldn't. And
Right.
I've always been one of those people that is just straight across the board. If it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, as my mother would say. And
Right.
if you couldn't do it, then I couldn't do it. But if I couldn't do it, you couldn't do it. And it didn't matter to me, gender, it didn't matter. It was like, if these are the rules, then these are the rules, right? Shouldn't that be the way it is? If God said this, then God said it.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the confusion, And funny enough, part of my cult raising sort of helped me with that, because they taught you to be so violently offended by anybody who would question you that I was like, wait, but
That's interesting.
the guys can do this, but I can't, because
Man, that's an interesting take.
that doesn't work for me.
Mhm.
And so they kind of shot themselves in the foot. And I honestly think they kind of do that across the board, because if you're teaching people that they can't, at some point you're going to get somebody who's going to go, but I want to.
Especially
And they're
today's
going to want
age,
to
yeah.
bad enough that they're going to do it.
Right.
So between that, and then there was again another scandal of I hate to call it a scandal, but another incident of a child being abused, and I was old enough to see it and know what was happening, and I said, that's it, I'm out, I'm done.
Got it.
Yeah.
Because it was, in that case, it was a little bit more sensitive. But when I was a kid, there was some children who were sexually abused, and I was too young to know that at the time that is what had happened. But their father was found out by church, and the church, rather than reporting it and doing anything about it, sent him off to another independent Baptist church. Again, they're not related, but they're very related.
Right.
And basically said, as long as you never come back, we won't tell anyone your secrets.
Oh
And left
my
his
God.
children with him to be abused.
Oh.
And yeah, and all of that happened when I was probably like in the 2nd grade. So I didn't know, or 3rd grade. So I didn't know much later. But fortunately, the pastor that was there when I left did report the incident that happened to the police, because he found out about it, and he said, I'm an adult, I'm required to report. So he reported it, thankfully, which is super uncommon in this world. They do not report sexual abuse at
Right.
all. But fortunately he did. But unfortunately, he still stood in the pulpit and said, we need to wrap our arms around this person and love them, and didn't tell everybody what had really happened,
Oh
but
my
just
God.
said, let's love them with his victim in the room.
Hmm.
And I said, I'm out. Enough is enough.
Right.
Yeah. So not to get personal, but did you have any sexual abuse from any of the?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, not any. Yeah, I did experience it, but it wasn't anything that was known, so it wasn't anything that was in by anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that most people don't know. So yeah.
Wow.
Hey, I was just curious because I was, like I said earlier, I was kind of shocked when I started looking up IFB, how much was out there that I didn't know about. And so, do you have a fear that these independent, these IFB churches and congregations, do you have a fear that they're gonna kind of culminate? Like, is that something that's on the radar? Because obviously, people are, like you said, there was a 2020 episode. There's a lot of material out there. Like, do you think that that's possible in the future? Is that they gain more power?
Honestly, I don't think so, and I'm hopeful not. For one, there are a lot of groups because they are very
She's cutting out.
forward LGBT.
Hey, Ann.
And you're in a
Yeah.
bad spot, I think. We
Yeah.
didn't get any of that last part.
Can you hear me?
Um,
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
yeah,
there you
I
go.
can hear you now.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
A lot of them are classified as hate groups because they are so hateful to the LGBTQ community. So they're on the radar of a lot of places already, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
But also, church in and of itself is sort of, kind of, I don't know, dying out, I guess. Which is, that's always been their thing. They've always been like, oh, if we don't stand for something, then, there won't be, I don't know. They always have that. They have that victim mentality, that martyr mentality.
Right.
Like, you have to believe and you have to. So they're
Apocalyptic.
so crazy when you meet them. Yes, they're
Yeah.
very like, you can't question me, and if you try to, it's very like, picture like the people who stormed the Capitol. Like, that's the kind of attitude when you ask them about, you question their faith.
Right.
That just crazy over the top, like, what is happening?
So the IFNB, is that, did I get the acronym correctly?
IFB, yeah.
Okay, that's the new and improved
Yeah,
version.
the NIFB, yeah. It's the
The
new
NIFB, right?
independent-
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so
That's
that's
the new and unimproved version, yes.
okay. So could you see, like, because I think where I'm going with it too is like it does seem like to me maybe it's something that's going to die and becomes under more scrutiny. Are they just tightening in and becoming more
Yes.
reclusive? And
I think the NIFB, like, it was crazy to me when I heard about it because I was like, how could you be worse than what we had?
Right.
Like, literally,
Yeah.
you couldn't. Boys had to have short hair, girls had to wear, long skirts. Like, how could you be worse than that?
right,
But they are, sadly, and they're also quiver pullers because, and that is the movement of have as many kids as you can because you need to build God's army.
oh god, yeah,
Yeah, but they preach, that marital rape is not a thing. It's so, which
Wow.
actually was kind of preached when I was a kid growing up too. Now that I think about it, but it's just, it's sort of that thing that the basically were raised in the IFB whose parents were pastors and that were just off their rocker, sort of got together and decided let's make it even worse. And so but I think the thing I think is that it's going to be hard for organizations like that to thrive in today's world because I feel like hopefully, at least in my opinion, I feel like society is a little more open now than it's ever been. And people are a little more, even if they don't understand something, they're a little more willing to listen to the others. I say that. We just had Trump president.
Keith was
but
actually,
people are
yeah.
a little more, open to educating themselves.
Yeah,
Especially
yeah.
like,
Well,
and
Keith,
so maybe they don't agree with you, but they'll read about it, or
right,
something.
right.
And so it's hard for an organization that says you can't to thrive in a place where everything is at your fingertips. If you can't, you had to bring your real Bible to church and you weren't supposed to be on your phone, but I don't know how many people held their Bible open and put their phone on top of it or like scroll on Facebook during that 2.5 hour message.
Yeah.
So, I'm hopeful that it doesn't get bigger.
Right.
Or getting bigger at this point in time. But it's not something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. So
Yeah, well, Keith actually brought that point up before the show. You said that, people are more guarded now, right?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, the cult thing, especially like started with, I mean, well, it can go way back, but Jim Jones, was of my era
Right,
because
yeah.
I'm that old.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think people, we've learned from some of these cults,
Right, yeah.
and so I think people are a little more on guard about
For sure.
things. But of course, there's people who are very desperate for love. And
Well, that's why cults still
Yeah.
exist.
and to be accepted, and that's
Yes.
exactly how a cult pulls you in.
Right. Well, and I think too,
Right.
like nowadays with social media and just where we are and with technology and communications, is that like I was telling you, like if you're gonna try to start a cult, you're probably gonna have to be on Instagram. And it's like a small,
Right.
like you're gonna have to be competing with everybody wants to start a cult on Instagram, like a fashion cult
Yeah.
or a music cult, right? Like so, essentially, it's becoming more difficult.
It's very hard to hold information control at this point.
Right.
Because everybody has it. And, back, way back when nobody had TVs, it was super easy to keep things from people. Back when,
Yeah.
you had to read a newspaper to know the news, it was easy to keep information from people. But now, I mean, any 9-year-old can get on Google
Right.
and look up how to build an airplane. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy the amount of information. So it's difficult to sort of get people. Now, once you've got them, if they're loyal, it's harder to get out than it is to get in that sense, because it's over your whole life. It's not, they don't just control you when you're at church. They control you everywhere you go and everything you do. And even the thoughts in your brain pop up sometimes. And it's like, oh, well, why do I feel that way?
Well, that checks the box. That checks one of the other boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Information
Yeah.
control.
I can remember going to like Walmart after getting out and having been out for like a year or two and seeing a lady there in, shorts and a tank top, very short shorts, very kind of, I'll call it a revealing tank top. I hate to kind of use that language, but that's the language that I was given. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, why is she dressed that way? And then I remember thinking, why do I care?
Yeah.
Like, it has nothing to do with me.
Absolutely.
And it was like, oh my gosh, because your first thought is just the thing you were taught, and it
Right.
just comes, and then you're like, but it doesn't matter, and it's so, but it takes you so long to get there that it's, and then you feel that post-cult shame of like, why did I feel that way? Like, oh,
Right.
what's wrong with me? Because you think you've worked through it all, and then you're like, something happens, and it's just like, oh, good grief.
Yeah, it's like
Get
a-
out
it's
of
like
my
a-
head, you crazy people.
Yeah. No, that was going to be. I actually had 2 more questions for you.
I've got one,
Okay. Go ahead.
If I can get a word in with Garrett.
Well, I was just
I'm
so,
just teasing.
so intrigued.
No. So, Ann, have you heard of because I was talking about social media, I see some cults using that to their advantage. There's one called TikTok
Yeah.
cult, and it's called The Garden. And these people, have you heard of that one?
I have not. I recently got TikTok because
So these
I didn't have time for it before, so now I have time to wait. So I recently got it.
Yeah, so these people bought some land and they don't vet anybody. So like underage kids will come in there, they'll give them alcohol, they'll smoke pot, they'll give them drugs, it's a whole deal. And one of the oddest things is they always ask, well, who's the leader? And there's one girl that's kind of dominant and another guy that's kind of dominant, but of course they say, oh, well, it's a free for all here.
Right.
But an interesting story or tragic story is there was a feral cat that attacked one of their chickens. So they killed the cat, ate the cat, skinned the cat.
Ooh.
Yeah, skinned the cat, and she made like a little scarf out of the fur for herself.
Oh
And
my gosh.
and then her dog, the same girl, her dog got hit by a truck, so they ate the dog. They skinned him, and she made part of it a dress. She cut his tail off, and she's sitting there while she's doing the interview, wagging this dog's severed tail, going, see, it's almost like he's still here.
Oh my
And I was like,
God.
you're out of your... Yeah,
God.
but then what happened, Ann, is they were using it, for people to come if they wanted to, but then people started attacking them. I mean, saying, you guys are out of your freaking mind. And so from what I understand, they closed membership is what they said.
Right.
Right.
Close ranks.
Right. So, yeah, it's very, and then the guy would go around, he would ask people like, hey, do you think we're in a cult? And they're like, no, man, it's a community. It's a community.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Well, and that goes back to Ann's point at the beginning is that's what it starts out as. It's just a community. Like we want you here. We love you.
Well,
be a part of this.
Yeah, Charles Manson, good example.
Right.
Hey man, we're just a bunch of hippies out here smoking pot and just being free.
Right.
But if you take any group of people like even when you're in college and they break people up in groups,
Yeah.
there's always that one dominant person who takes lead,
Right.
you know, and
Right.
and Manson kind of did that, and
Right.
all those girls said, you know, oh, it's very peaceful, it's all about love, and then it got really dark real
Right.
fast, and
Right.
so yeah, it's just so this TikTok thing is just it's horrendous. I just can't imagine wearing my cat's skin over my like a
God,
scarf,
Yeah, that's insane.
and then wagging my dog's tail.
yeah. It'd be nice.
I mean, ooh, that is something different.
Well, they said they didn't. Yeah, and they asked them. I said, "Why did you eat the cat?" And they blamed the cat first. They go, "Well, if a cat comes in killing our chickens, it's going to have to die, and then we don't want to waste any food. So we
Gotta
make
eat the cat.
we make resources out of what we
Oh,
want.
got
Yeah,
it.
got to eat the
You guys
cat,
are
man.
So awesome.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just give me Chick-fil-A or
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I'm sure it tastes like chicken. It's-
But even that though, like even that starts to check the boxes, and that was gonna be kind of like my closing thing with Ann. What I was curious about is, so me and Keith had basically a list of 7 things that would classify a cult, and you pretty much through your description and your stories. I mean, she pretty much hit every single one
Everything.
of those on the dot. And so
we'll go down them and ask her.
Okay.
And so
do you feel like that you were it opposed your critical thinking while you were in this church?
critical thinking is not allowed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thinking as a female is really not allowed at all, but critical thinking is certainly, I mean, that, I don't even know how they would, I've never even heard the phrase critical thinking.
That's actually
The whole
Yeah.
time I was there. In fact, going to college is what sort of, that also helped
Right.
me out.
Isolating members and penalizing them for leaving.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it was, you would be preached about. They literally would make you into a sermon if you left. And
Right.
God.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Number 3, I mean, we already talked about this, emphasizing special doctrines outside of Scripture. So emphasizing the Old Testament, that marks that box.
yeah.
Seeking inappropriate loyalty to their leaders, which in your case, I guess,
yeah.
would have been the team, the group around the preacher, right?
Yeah, no, you couldn't say anything bad about the preacher. I mean, when, you know, the way that they govern their churches is, again, independent. It's supposed to be by vote. But if you vote against the pastor, people are going to know about it.
Bad news bears.
And bad news bears, they're going to use that against, and they won't say anything specific like, oh, you voted against him, right? Because they don't want to, like, make it blatant that they've done this.
Right.
But, you know, suddenly, you know, oh, well, your kids can't go to the camp because the funds that they didn't raise the funds, or
Right.
Oh.
you know, you know, whatever they could use against you, they absolutely would. And you know, being female, for sure, you know, anything they could use against you. Usually, it was your children.
Which
And
marks an Xbox.
Yeah.
you know, and they would blame you for any kind of unhappiness or any kind of problems your children had,
Which
you
would've-
know, and then they try to
critical
get
thinking.
you to send your kids off to these homes, like the one I told you that other boy went to. I mean, if your
Isolating
kids
family
had any
members.
kind of issue and they were quote unquote acting out, I actually found out later that that there was a member of my family that was going, you know, that somebody in my family were considering sending one of them off, and thankfully my parents did not allow that. Because again, I had a very stubborn father, and he wasn't the best, but his kids were his kids, not anybody else's.
Right.
So he wasn't about that.
Right.
And you know, we were essentially raised at friends' houses sometimes, but we were still close enough where if we called, they could show up, and they knew what was going on, because you know, friends will talk. You know, your friend's parents will talk to your parents,
Right.
so they could get information, and we weren't someplace where somebody else was making, you know, the rules.
You you marked off the rest of the boxes. If I was dishonoring the family unit, and you mentioned multiple times even about you know, tithing before feeding, crossing biblical boundaries of behavior.
Yep. Yep.
And hey, the last one is the one I was gonna, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but I'm curious because it kind of got me for a second. It's just as separation from church. And initially I was like,
absolutely.
what the hell does that mean? But do you obviously consider the IFB as separation from normal church, correct?
Well, if they're pointing
for
fingers at
sure.
other churches,
I
then
mean,
you know.
yeah. Oh, they preached about how the Catholics were going to help. My
Yeah.
grandfather was Catholic. And my whole life, I thought he was going to die and go to hell because he was
poor guy.
Catholic.
Yeah.
And he was the most loving man I've ever known, even to this day.
Right.
And, and again, he was always frustrated that we were going without. And so here they are telling me, he's evil, and he's the man who loves me so much,
Right.
So for sure. And funny, they were so, they controlled your life so much. Even when you go on vacation, they would tell you need to go to church while you're on vacation. It needs to be one of their churches. And you needed to bring back a Sunday bulletin pamphlet thing. This is when they still, I don't know that they give those out at churches anymore, but that you had to bring one back to prove that you went to church on your vacation.
Oh my God.
Wow.
That is absolutely insane. I grew up Baptist, and it wasn't that strict.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Bible Belt, most people here grow up Baptist. You grow up something.
You know what I
mean?
Yeah,
I don't
for
know
sure.
a whole lot of people who've grown up here that aren't, religious of some kind. I know a few, but very, very few.
Now my brother did go to.
Grows up something, but
My brother did go to one church. It's not funny, but it's kind of. He had went to a liquor store on Saturday, and a pastor had drove by and saw him coming out, and he announced it at church the next day. He said, "He goes, I'm so sad. My heart is really sunk because I saw one of our members of our church coming out of a liquor store."
oh, that would have happened. That
Yeah.
absolutely would have happened.
But at least they didn't name him.
It would have been
I'm Catholic.
I was going to say it would have been more. It was
Yeah.
never. They never really named people, but it would have been more of a you drink liquor, you're going to hell. And
I'm Catholic. You
that's
can
the devil. And
you can run into the priest at the liquor store. So,
Wow.
hey,
I know, so nice. Must be nice.
yeah. Hey, the last thing I was gonna ask, and man, yeah, it was great when we talked about it earlier. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it was that bite thing. I just wanted to go over that one more time because when you were explaining that to me, I just thought that was a kind of a cool checklist
Yeah.
for all of
Yeah,
you
and-
people out there that think you're getting in the life after life cult.
Yeah.
All right. So what is it? Tell us about it.
The
Real
book-
fast.
Okay, so it's a model like I guess it was. I know it's in the book by Stephen Hassan. I think he's the one who came up with it. And the short version is that he came up with a model to just sort of identify, is this group a cult? And so if it checks the boxes, it is. If it doesn't check them, then it's not. And if it checks some but not the others, maybe you need to put like a little yellow flag out and kind of keep your eyes peeled.
Mhm.
But it's called the BITE model, and every letter is like a, what do you call it, like an acronym or something?
Right,
It
yeah.
stands for something else.
Yep.
And so the B stands for behavior control, and so that's like I was saying, like it wasn't just at church. You had to wear a dress at church, but you were also supposed to wear them always at home. Your hair, boys' hair had to be short, girls' hair couldn't be as short as the boys' hair. That
Right.
kind of thing. And then the I stands for information control. Again, like where are you
Yep.
getting your sources? You can't read whatever. And then T is for thought control. It's like when you see something, when you think it, like, does it, that like the thought that popped into my head at Walmart, the automatic. I was trained that if a girl dresses a certain way, it makes her a certain kind of person.
Right.
And then the E is for the emotional control. And that's, again, like as parents, that's what they hardcore would use against you.
Right.
Your kids are going to go to hell if you don't come to church. Your kids are going to go to hell if you don't blah, blah, blah,
Ugh.
And I can't think of anything more manipulative and insidious and disgusting than using someone's children to manipulate them into doing what you want.
Right.
I mean, it's just so gross.
And this has been a truly fascinating interview.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Just
so
thank
much.
God you got out of it.
Yeah.
And thank God you had
Yeah.
the mindset to go, hey, this isn't right.
Yeah.
And
I mean, like I said, I had some older siblings, and thankfully one of them got out and kind of never gave up on getting me out. And like I said, when I did go back to school, and education is so important. It's always been really important because I didn't get one
Right.
because of
Right.
Christian school.
Right.
And so thankfully, just me getting the education and her always being, kind of in the background and just pumping that, like, you can do this. It's okay. You won't go to hell if, kind of
Right.
stuff. It really helped. And then, like, once I got out, that was kind of it.
wow.
We appreciate you sharing. Your
Yeah,
story.
thank you so much.
Hey, like we told
Yeah,
you
thanks for
before.
having me on.
Yeah, like we told you before. All of our shows, we try to push the conversation forward, and this has been. I've learned so much.
Yeah, I've too.
Yeah,
I just
you're
hope
the best.
people will watch this and You know, so hopefully we're helping people to stay away, be aware of being sucked into something.
Yeah, because every church is not, not a bad thing. It's
right.
Not a cult.
For
Every
sure.
church, but some people masquerade as churches, and they're really bad for you and for your family. So
but
be careful.
But on the other hand, it is hard when you said when you first went there that they had open arms, they were loving to you, and you felt good about this place, and I'm sure that's how every cult starts. So hopefully they have the mindset to know as we're getting into this thing. When
you ask questions, if the questions are, it's one thing if a religion can't give you an answer. If they tell you, we don't know, we just believe in faith. That's acceptable. Yeah. But if they tell you you don't need to be asking that question, maybe it's time to book it out the door really fast. Run
That's
fast.
A good policy. That's a good policy.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much. Seriously.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Have a good night.
All right,
bye.
Bye.
You too.
Great vibes from Ann.
Yeah, that's
Okay, a couple things that have come up in chat while we were going through this is
crap, and we just disconnected with her.
No, not necessarily for her. And honestly, we had a little bit of a debate going in chat that I would not have subjected her to.
Yeah.
Of course.
On the list that you've been going through about that Chicks-a-Box, the listeners or viewers are wanting to know what list it is you're using, and can you just kind of go through that step by step?
Yeah, it's basically a bunch of psychologists who came up, and there's several different lists actually. This is one list that Garrett and I found. We found it off Google, but it's basically psychology.
That's how we do things.
Yeah, we're too lazy. We go to the library. But
tell them what we Googled. 7 things that.
Because I was looking up last night, like how do you know you're in a cult? And there's several things with several different lists. But to answer the question, a group of psychologists got together and they said, okay, let's discuss what makes a cult.
Right.
And so they have this checklist. So if you meet those, then you're in a cult.
Right.
I would say if you meet 4 or 5 of them, you're in a cult.
it's a pretty, this is a pretty damning list. Like, if you can check it's crazy. Like, you're definitely in a cult. So get out of there. Well, even the bite model. That's why I wanted to ask her about that, because that's just another model you can use, right?
Yeah.
And so, behavior, information.
But that's the scary. Yeah. The scary thing about this is that they come across not really as a cult. They come across as a Baptist religion. So you think, okay, it's a church, it's legit, and then it gets twisted.
I think that's kind of what caused a little bit of a debate.
Right.
In chat this evening. One listener in particular
said, I'm Baptist and we're definitely not a cult.
And
and she's right.
And got very offended, but was not really, but she wasn't really listening.
Got you.
All she heard was church.
Yeah.
And
I saw that a couple
they
times.
Went to church.
I'm like, I go to church.
My kids go to church. My kids go to a great church.
Yeah.
And, and that's wonderful.
Friends, man.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
But this was a very different experience, and that individual's belief or disbelief in the discussion that Ann just shared with us really is neither here nor there. This was Ann's experience.
Right.
This was her life and her experience, and she was kind enough to come on and share that with us.
Right.
And, I'll be honest, guys, I booted her out of the room.
Okay.
I booted her out of chat.
I can probably guess who that was.
You know exactly who that was.
Pammo.
So,
but I can see how if someone just popped on the chat and they started listening and she was mentioning Baptist religion, church, that they could say, hey, I'm offended, I'm a Baptist. But that's not the case here.
No, that's
I think
a word.
They're using,
in this case, it's a word.
They're using the word Baptist and church to suck you in, and then to control your life.
Yeah, and it's definitely bizarre.
Do you think they believe that? I mean, the pastors and stuff. I guess they do truly believe that.
Though. Like, that's the thing about these.
At
kind
some
of situations,
point, they were
dangerous.
Yeah, at some point, those pastors were, as a kid.
Well, like she said, every family's different inside the church. And that's why that's why I wanted to ask her, like, is this something that gets bigger and it's just kind of like watered down, or is this something where the trajectory looks like the IFB is now becoming the NIFB? And kind of like you saw with Branch Davidians, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's Seventh-day Adventists. There's good people that are Seventh-day Adventists, right? It's just that David Koresh took it way too far and got insane. And I do believe that that was also part of the Old Testament. I think that that's what, and that's, I mean, all that stuff is interesting. So they're literally using the words to benefit them. And I do believe that they really believe it.
And manipulate. I mean, they're twisting the words too. But any church, I think that, because even when I was going to Baptist church, we usually went by the New Testament. We did, of course they touched on the Old Testament, but it was like Jesus forgives you. But in the Old Testament, it was like you're going to hell.
Check it.
You're going to hell.
Yeah.
So so anybody just understand we're not saying that churches and Baptists are all cults at all. Disclaimer there. No, we're not saying it at all. But we're saying that cults can hide inside a certain sect of religion and call themselves, Baptists, but actually it's a totally different thing going on.
Absolutely.
When you're sexually molesting kids and you're letting, like a lot of them I read too, was like the men could pick another man's wife and they had to submit whether they wanted to or not.
Right.
And it's just like...
Well, in her situation and Ann's situation, and that's what's so interesting about IFB being independent, as she put in air quotes, independent without independence, right? Is because you might see from one church to the other, like her situation could have gotten like that really quick.
Yeah.
Right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the pastor that she said believed had a good heart.
Yeah.
She said, we had a good conversation at the end. He died, and I felt good about where he was in his heart. And so you can see where that situation, if it would have been somebody different, like a David Koresh, she could have ended up in a damn compound somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Very easily.
It sounds like that pastor had a lot of outside influence. I mean, when I was comparing it to the mafia, it's like you got the boss, the underboss, you got the consigliere. Those people cancel the boss, and this is the decision you should make.
Right.
So even though it may not been in his heart, he's got deacons or whatever, telling him, hey, she committed a sin. How can you argue with this?
Dude, it's like a board.
Right. And so therefore they have to be punished and they go along with it. And so that was really...
Well, that's the scary... go ahead.
There's a statement in chat right now that just really, I think, sums it up pretty simply and eloquently. It says, if something can't be questioned, there's a problem.
Right. Yeah, that's what Ann was saying.
Yeah. God, that's our government, though, isn't it?
I mean, that's a lot of things. But that's where the checks and balances hopefully come into play, right? And that's why you can have big organizations.
And Aunt Doug's concerned about giving up his Jelly of the Month club if that's a cult.
Yeah. Doug, we don't approve of that in the Life After Life cult.
Right.
Yeah, Patrick said he would join our cult, but he said as long as he doesn't have to give up whiskey.
Dude, we will share that whiskey.
Yeah, send us whiskey, and you can become part of the cult.
Yeah, absolutely.
We say that in jest. But
yes, of course.
We know that people that have lived through those types of experiences, obviously, it's not a joking matter. It's just we're a bunch of twisted individuals, and it's a coping mechanism for us. So.
I gotta admit, for me, it was hard to watch. It was heartbreaking because, man, I love kids, and when I start hearing about a poor 7-year-old being led to the back of a church, I'm like, I want to kill this person.
Yeah, for sure.
When you've got 4 children and 3 of them are daughters. When you've got 4 granddaughters.
Yes.
And I'm going to make a pitch out there. If anybody has ever watched The Handmaid's Tale, anybody who has daughters, it just makes you cringe to think that there has ever been a world like that, and there has been.
Well, and Pamela, all of us being parents of daughters, right, and Ann having a daughter, that was the breaking point for her.
Exactly.
And I think that's so important, and that's kind of where, and I wanted to ask her this, and we can do it. Let's save it for another show. But what was that healing process like for her? Because that's not only one traumatic event. That's
well,
years,
it kind of
decades of traumatic
that
events.
stays with you,
right? But it also kind of sounds like, at least with that particular pastor, she said she got to meet with him. He apologized about how he had treated her. so it sounds like maybe her personal experience wasn't great, obviously, but maybe wasn't as awful as some that we hear about.
Almost Roswelled it.
Roswell's.
Yeah.
No, that, yeah.
You know.
Well, and I kind of like, when she was talking about going to Walmart and looking at the lady in the shirt and like immediately judging her and then immediately checking herself and being like, whoa, wait, like I'm not in that world anymore.
Right.
I kind of like really felt for that because I remember, and when I was at West Point, okay, and it's a very like it's almost like a damn cult. No, but so but I remember going through that and getting out of the Army and everything, and having those same kind of things, like sitting in a classroom and somebody like just starts eating a bag of chips next to me, and I'm like, what? How disrespectful is that? And then I was like, oh wait, I'm in a different world now.
Right.
And so for her to be in it for decades and decades, and then all of a sudden, that whole Walmart thing, I was like, man, that has to mess with your head.
Yeah.
Like the relationships you build with people, meeting new friends.
Right.
Like, just
I was kind of curious myself to know if she's still active in any type of a religious
that'd been a great question.
or if that just kind of soured her.
Right.
On
So
all
any
of
time
it.
to speak up, Hammy.
Yeah, next time, please just.
I was battling in
I know,
chat.
I know.
It's a war zone out there.
I know. No, I understand.
It's complete.
But that is a great question.
It is completely intriguing that you can be raised or somehow become a part of a cult like Heaven's Gate, dude.
Yeah.
Like, and they don't realize, like, they're so in it.
Well, I think that's though how so many cycles of abuse continue to be perpetuated because people grow up thinking this is normal.
Right. Yeah.
And for them it is.
right.
Or
it becomes normal.
Yeah. So I think in those situations when your normal is maybe a little skewed from the rest of us, you don't realize it. You don't know it.
When I wonder, like,
what, like you said, what's the trigger? What's the thing that the light bulb suddenly goes off and you go, wait a minute.
Or it doesn't.
It was George Carlin for me.
Yeah.
Right. I know you've mentioned that before.
Yeah, I've said it 100 times. He said I used to be religious until I learned to think for myself.
Right.
And I think that's what people should. I mean, I'm not saying go against your religion, but I think that you do need to think for yourself. Is this logical? What we're doing? Is this hurting people? Is it hurting myself? And just not, go with the followers and be influenced that way.
Man, one of and I'm gonna get nerdy here for a second. So I was an art, philosophy, and literature major, right? Apple.
What a nerd.
Like the forbidden fruit.
No,
okay.
Yeah.
Hey, but I thought it was interesting because I was in the military, right? Yep. And one of my favorite books that we ever read was the autobiography, The Life of Frederick Douglass, written by Frederick Douglass, an American slave, right? And throughout that book, he constantly talks about how somebody finally taught him the ABCs. Mm-hmm. And once he learned the ABCs and he started learning how to read, then all of a sudden he was becoming more free. And so it's almost like they're slaves to this, right? Like that whole information thing, like, dude, being able to control what people are watching on TV, what they're reading, what they can't read. Yeah. Dude, contemporary Christian music.
I know. I can't even listen to that.
I mean, that's when you're saying, like, you have to be like, okay, wait, I can't listen to Carrie Underwood, I'm going to go to hell or something,
I mean, usually you can listen. Because I know a lot of people or I have friends who go to church, and that's all they listen to is the contemporary Christian station,
no problem,
and it's not a problem.
No problem.
And so wow.
Well, the people at like Heaven's Gate, I mean, if you go to the Instagram, I posted a link to I think it was like I didn't post this link because it was kind of disturbing, but it's the exit interviews with the people that were involved in Heaven's Gate that ended up committing suicide.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, some of these people were in there for 20 years. And I kind of wonder, like, how many of those people because you've seen the guy, right?
Yeah.
The Heaven's Gate guy.
He's crazy looking.
He's eccentric. He's wild looking. Like, how many people walk into that situation? I think this happened in 97. Back in 1977, in the late 70s, they're like, oh, let's go, like, listen to this guy who believes that UFOs are going to suck us up into the air, right?
Yeah.
And then 20 years later are sitting there doing an exit interview the day that they're going to eat applesauce with a sedative inside of it, wash it down with vodka, tape a plastic bag around their head, put their Nike shoes on, and die.
Yeah.
And time it at the same time of comments coming in because they believe that the spaceship's coming to save them.
Yeah.
Like how many of those people just walked in one day in 1977 and just wanted to see what it's about?
Yeah.
Like that's to me because I look at Heaven's Gate a lot. Like that's the scary thing to me, right? I mean that's the terrifying thing.
And to take it that far, and that they would actually go that far.
Over 20 years, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, something that could seem so innocent, right? Like
Right.
you
Was
would,
it voluntary? I mean, like, we talked about Jim Jones where
we'll talk about that.
he basically had an armed guy that was passing out the Kool-Aid, was armed,
Right.
and was basically putting a gun to their head saying, drink the Kool-Aid, have your kids to drink the Kool-Aid. So there wasn't a choice there. I'd rather be shot actually than die from cyanide. I don't.
Right.
It's a horrible death.
Well, they had to see it happening to hundreds of people before
my
them.
God, can you imagine? So, I mean, was the Heaven's Gate, though, was a gun, were they forced, or were they just so indoctrinated that they
Right.
said, oh,
That's
okay.
interesting because
They must have really believed it.
Because I don't know if like any weapons were found in the house or anything like that. That'd be interesting to find out.
That would be a mass suicide. Jim Jones
Dude.
was a mass murderer.
I agree.
But they still call
I agree.
Yeah, they still call it a mass suicide. I was like, no, it wasn't. These
No.
people were forced to drink the cyanide-laced Kool-Aid.
Right. Once they've been secluded in Guyana, like we got to understand that like I believe that Jim Jones at one point was in Oklahoma.
I don't know.
Possibly.
I know he's in the southern states.
And
That's
then
where he
went
started.
Up, yep, and then he went up to Northern California. Right? And then media scrutiny, all of a sudden he's in Guyana. So by that time, you've made it all the way there.
Yeah.
I mean, you've gone to across the world to be a part of this thing. And that was like almost 1,000 people.
And then
900 people.
in his head, I've got 100% control of these people now.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
got them away from mainstream. We're out on our own little paradise.
Right.
air
And he
quotes.
has that small group
Yeah.
around him. And you see that
Yeah.
in a lot of cults. Like, man, I forgot who did it. It was a great, like, 6-7 part series on Waco. It came out recently.
I saw that.
Really good, really good. But even, like, David Koresh had those loyalists around him.
Yeah.
It's like an almost, and I guarantee you, Jim Jones had those loyalists around him that were willing to hold shotguns to kids' heads and to parents' heads and make them drink that cyanide, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, what kind of separates Heaven's Gate is that they were all kind of that collective. And so that's when I think you see those like mass suicides, right? And that's the difference. But just it's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, and the thing about the Waco David Koresh thing was that, the main guy, I don't know if you remember, the main guy they kept talking to, he was kind of saying, hey, man, it wasn't like what everybody thinks. We were peaceful. He still believed that.
Right.
And
Yeah,
because he was saying, and he actually wrote a book. He goes, I want people to know the truth.
Right.
The government murdered us.
Right.
And we were just peaceful people living on this land.
Right.
So.
Which is bizarre.
Bizarre, yeah, because
Come on,
that
dude.
guy was horrible.
Right.
Koresh was, 10-year-old girls,
You're my wife,
11-year-old
you're my
girls.
wife, you're
Yeah,
my spiritual wife.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which gives me free
gross.
reign. Well, yeah, and checks off all the boxes, man.
Right.
Hey, I wanted to give a shout out really fast. I saw earlier the show I've been talking to you about, Cult, Crime, and Cabernet.
Yeah.
They were in. I told them, I don't know if they could see. Here, hang on. This is tough. I don't want a Roswell. Our number right over there. Yeah, I told them, feel free to call in. But hey, those guys are girls. Excuse me, those girls, 2 girls, females. They have been supporting us on Instagram, and their name stuck out to me. I was like, dude, that's a great name for a podcast.
Awesome.
So they're on all the platforms, and
Are they still on, Pam?
They haven't said anything in a little bit, but they did make some comments earlier, very positive. Someone asked something about can we throw up other YouTube channels and podcasts, and I told them, of course, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Yeah. Go to their podcast, go to their YouTube channel. I mean, we're not in
Check it
competition with anybody. So
no, absolutely not.
again, we all should work together.
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I mean, dude, these conversations, it's always funny because, I shouldn't say funny, we cover very serious topics besides AI. No, that was terrifying. But
was scary.
when we pick a topic and we kind of start doing our research and everything like that, sometimes I'm like, okay, cults. Like, I'm 35 years old. never once in my life have I ever thought I've been in a cult. If I felt like I would have been like sniffed out a cult immediately. I'm like, is this a cult, guys? Okay, I'm out of here. But then you start doing the research on it, because that's surface level stuff.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the more I start learning about it, the more vulnerable I begin to feel. And I'm like, okay, now I can actually see how this could happen to a normal person.
Yeah.
Like, just like that, you make a decision.
Yeah, because at first you think, these guys got to be gullible. You know, you kind of think these are people so desperate for love that they're willing, you know.
Right.
But but you also got
but
that.
It's not just love.
No, it's
I mean,
not.
It's acceptance.
It's being accepted into something. It's the same thing why we have the Crips and the Bloods.
Yeah, it's being
they
born
want to want to be a part of something, wanting to be accepted.
Right.
So it's even harder for when they're children and they grow up in that kind of environment.
Right.
How, you know, I'm not going to question mom and dad. Mom and dad said it's good, so it must be.
But even children that grow up in normal, air quote, normal environments.
No one's a normal environment.
Exactly. But in the more, you know, traditional where, you know, you shave your head if you want. I don't care. You know, you can wear your jeans if you're a girl, and you can wear a dress if you're a boy. I don't care. Yeah. Anyway, but people that grow up in, I don't know, more traditional, accepting whatever society, as opposed to those cult-like environments where, you know, you're expected to dress this way and wear your hair this way and speak this way and study this way and watch this and don't watch that. I think that those people, as children, like any child, as they get older, most of us, and someone pointed out in chat about the time you get ready to leave for college, you start questioning everything
Trying to find
that you've been taught,
right.
you know, and that's part of becoming an adult is, you know, not just buying into everything that people have told you is true. It's trying to discover that truth for yourself.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
I love that.
Right.
That's why I'm still a kid. I feel like every single one of these episodes, I'm constantly like, it's a tug of war with like what you believe and how you look at the world.
Right.
Which I think is like so important now. That's what I always tell Cass, because Cass is always, dude, she's like really interested. You know, she became Catholic. She converted.
Right.
Went through the whole process. And like the one thing that her sponsor told her, it was like, hey, if you have any questions about Catholicism, don't ask your husband. He's a lifelong Catholic. He's not going to be able to answer it.
I know. Remember when I asked you about purgatory?
Yeah.
He was like, I don't know.
I had to go ask one of my students from a Catholic school. She told me right away. I was like, oh, okay, thank you. She's always asking me these questions, and it's like this tug of war, and you're constantly trying to find these things. So that's why I think our show is so awesome, is because we take it like a topic like this today, and now all of a sudden I'm like, wow, really thinking about situations in life, and you know how some things. I talked to you about living in LA earlier, right?
Yeah.
Wait, did I mention this to you about the Masons? Have I ever told you this story? The Freemasons?
I knew you lived in LA, but I didn't know
told
about
you about the Freemason story?
No. And
Cass knows
Doug's a Freemason.
Okay, well, this is a different kind of society, I think. This is a weird, secretive one.
Or maybe it's not, and Doug's just keeping secrets.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, there were times, you know, you hear it a lot in Hollywood. Like, you know, I worked with the Quades, man. They're eccentric, dude. Like, they can't even come in the U.S. anymore. They're like stuck in Canada. They're super crazy. But you know, even like being around Devo, and they were all a part of these very like eccentric and creative things. And one time I got invited to an interview to become a part of this Freemason club, right? And so somebody was going to call me at a certain time. We're going to meet at some hotel down in Sunset, right?
Yeah.
And person called me, set it up, and don't call back, blah, blah, blah. And I definitely didn't go to that meeting. So there was my cult.
I do remember. I do remember you talking about that.
Yeah. And it was just like,
but you didn't show up.
I got a book. I still have it. I have a leather, really that was given to me. And so, but it was just so. I look back on these when I'm going through this, and I'm thinking, dude, that could have been really different. Like I could have went to that and really became invested in it. And a lot of it is money. Like earlier, you were talking about Nivixen.
Whatever it's
yeah. There was a cult called the Sullivans, and their members are called the Sullivanians. Super weird, but that was a money thing as well, where they bring you in, you
Those
start making the money.
mid-level marketing schemes.
Scientology, some people would argue, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's just so many different ways that it can happen.
Yep. So Ivy, yes, we are in Oklahoma, so we are neighbors, I guess.
I love Oklahoma.
I do too.
A lot of people shit on Oklahoma.
They shouldn't. I mean, Oklahoma was voted like in the top 3 of the most polite people.
Love it, dude.
Like, people from the East Coast or something come here and they're like, man, everybody's so friendly and laid back.
Yeah.
And
Oh
no, what?
Aunt Doug's after you, Garrett.
And how does Garrett spell his last name?
Now, I have to say, not necessarily in Doug's defense, because Doug's perfectly capable of defending himself.
Yeah.
Doug is a Freemason. I know very little about Freemasons, just probably as much
Because
as
Doug
the
won't tell us anything.
general population
For
does.
sure. Yeah.
But I will tell you that Doug has been such a blessing to our family.
Yep.
Very grateful to have him as part of our family.
Yep.
He's very devoted to his Masonic and Shriner work. And
Well, it's not a cult.
It's not. Yeah,
and,
yeah.
They do a lot of fundraisers. They do a lot
They
of
do a
lot of good
work.
things. Yeah, they do a lot of good work.
They do a lot of
But
good
I think
charity work.
I think people do try to make
Illuminati type
Well,
stuff.
Exactly.
because-
and it's because of the unknown
Right.
It's
aspect.
because it's
Yeah.
a secret society.
Absolutely.
That and
And
anytime
there
you have
probably are sex out there. Sex, I should say.
sex, there's
Sex. S-E-C-T-S. That's my Oklahoma accent.
Yeah.
sex.
I-
S
You
E
know what I'm
C
saying? But
S.
there probably are offshoots. I mean, there has to be. So,
Yeah.
like I said, the Illuminati.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically the same thing. So, but yeah, there's the
Hey,
Freemasons.
the
do a
Masons
lot of
have
awesome stuff,
pancake
dude.
breakfasts. You can't
Dude,
beat that.
their pancake breakfasts are legit. I got the Masonic Lodge down here.
Yeah,
for
well, the
sure.
one in Mustang always
Have
had
you-
the pancake breakfast.
Dude, have you been in their
I have
little
not.
room where they have like a bear and a tiger and it's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
stuffed animals everywhere. Yeah, yeah. a
Have
bunch
you
of
had the pancake
badass-
breakfast?
Yeah, dude.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I was
Is
friends
it?
with a couple of guys that like older guys.
Yeah,
They're all older. Yeah, they like would. One was a Mason, so he
Right.
had an office in there.
yeah, they are a great bunch. I mean,
They are.
they do a lot of great things. And,
But to my
but
point-
like I said, it's just because there's a secret society that people will come up with these theories. Oh,
Right.
they're killing babies. They're
Yeah.
sacrificing animals, and
Well,
they're.
and to that point we made earlier,
I
is
believe
like,
it's a Christian society. Isn't
well,
it?
here's the thing: is
Yes.
we talked about the word Baptist earlier.
Yeah.
The IFB was just using a word.
Yeah.
Just like these people could have been using the Masons as something. I just didn't. It was different. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so it was just one of those situations where I think to myself, it could have been great. I could be a bazillionaire right now. I don't know. But I'm glad I made the decision I did, obviously.
Yeah.
But going down the rabbit hole of this topic, it made me question like things like that. Like, oh, that could have been interesting. And
Yeah.
how easy it could have been for Anne, or somebody like her to just live in this thing for 20 years.
Yeah, well, she didn't know any different.
She
I mean,
didn't, right.
she was from a baby. So what'd you say, 6 months old?
6 months old, man.
So she knew nothing
So
else.
it's really incredible that she found her way out, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. She found her way out, and she seems like she turned out to be a pretty normal person.
Yeah.
So
Okay, Manson, cult or no cult?
it turned into a cult. I mean, there's a whole lot of people out there that would say no, it wasn't. It started, Charlie would sing and play guitar, and for some reason they said he was very charming. He attracted women, and he talked about peace, love, and
Right.
love your brother and all that stuff. And so a lot of these girls, I mean, heck, a couple of them one was a prom queen, one was, good students.
Right.
Now there were several though that were, not troubled, not from
Right.
good families.
Right.
And so, yeah, but anytime, like, you read that message there, and
Yeah.
Manson's little group, he hit every check mark on
Right.
there.
Oh, definitely.
Because he basically, he started, just like I said, anytime you get a group together, there's always that one dominant person
Right.
who kind of,
Charismatic
and they said he would preach, they would play guitar,
Right.
take acid, and he'd preach, about
yeah.
the end of the world and all the stuff. And so, yeah, I would say it was a cult. I know a lot of people out there who Mansonites.
Having said that, how many people do you know that when they get drunk or get high, they get off on a philosophy and
sure.
they just run with it?
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
And he was doing it on a nightly basis
Yeah.
around people.
Yeah, and
that
he
were,
always, like, when he did the acid thing, which, you know, I don't know if you can say the word orgies, but he would take.
You mean the word you just said?
Yeah, well, he would take a very, very small
Right,
dose,
yeah.
and he would dose everybody
He's
with a full,
manipulating everybody.
so he can manipulate the
Yes.
whole thing. And I'm sure he did that with his indoctrination of what he thought was going to be a race war or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, we're going to do a show next week. There are some interesting things about it. I know Pam's not crazy about wanting to do this. She's kind of boycotted it somewhat. So hopefully she'll be here next week, but maybe not. But there's some things that, you know, it doesn't make Manson any more innocent. He really didn't have a fair trial.
Yeah.
But he's a scum. The guy was horrible.
Right.
And the whole helter-skelter thing, you know, I used to firmly believe that. But now there's a whole bunch of other things that really led to the Sharon Tate and the LaBianca murders.
Right.
That was beyond the race war thing. It was, and we'll get into that next week. It's a little interesting, but it doesn't make it any better.
See, but I think
Doesn't make it any
I think
better,
the information that you're going to talk about next week, though, would almost start to move this situation away from a cult, because essentially it becomes these people were acting independently.
Yeah, but under Charlie's somewhat influence, you know,
got
even
you. I got
Manson
you.
said, "Yeah, I was indirectly responsible, I guess."
Yeah.
He did. But Manson, he'd go back and forth. You know, he's a con man. You can't
Right.
believe anything he says.
Right.
But there are some weird things about that case. I mean, you know, where they discovered the bodies in the living room, but yet there's a whole bunch of Jay Sebring's blood on the porch over by the bushes.
right.
Like the bodies were moved. And they said even the girls, when they showed the crime scene photos, they were kind of had a shocked look on their face, like, "Hey, that's not where we left them."
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And we'll get into Manson. Manson may have went back to the scene of the crime about 4 that morning
Okay.
to see what they did,
Oh,
and
good check in.
was and maybe he's the one that actually moved some of the bodies around, possibly. I don't even want to mention. No, I shouldn't even say it.
Last step of the leadership process is supervising, which would throw him into that category.
Yeah.
That he's supervising something that he's orchestrated.
Which would be, yeah. I mean, there's the whole new wave of this Helter Skelter was bullshit. This was something totally different why these killings happened.
Right. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. There's some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
That, and I kind of now, I think Vincent Boyossi, he was the prosecutor on that. He had to do whatever he had to do to get Manson prosecuted. He didn't want him walking. They did not have a strong case against him.
Right.
He wasn't even at the scene of the crime at the Tate murder, right?
Right.
And when he drove them to the LaBianca's house, he split.
Right.
He left them, so he's like, "Hey, man, I didn't kill anybody."
Yeah.
And so the prosecutors knew that, and they thought, how are we going to convict this guy? Because we don't have enough evidence, against him.
Yeah.
And we can convict Tex and the rest, Susan,
yeah.
Leslie, and Patricia, but what are we going to do about this? So I think Helter Skelter, the theory, may have been kind of made up by Boyossi to do what he had to do to make sure this guy stayed in prison.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because even Linda Kasabian's defense attorney said that, there were some things that were done that wasn't in the book,
right?
And that was not known.
Interesting.
And we'll discuss all that next week.
I'm so excited.
But yeah, it is interesting. But like I said, and I was trying to tell Pam, I'm not glorifying Manson at all. I'm not. No. And by taking away the race war thing about it, still doesn't make him any more innocent.
Right.
Was he directly responsible? Now I don't know, but indirectly, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's some of these people, I don't know if they know about this crime or anything, but there's some weird stuff, man, that's not that people don't know about. So it's going to be an interesting show.
It's going to be heavy.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting show.
Well, next week, July 6th, is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, I've got July 6th in the baby poll, so I may not be here anyway.
Yeah, our grandbaby
is
coming. Yay. Yeah, can't
Yeah.
wait. Got a boy, first boy grandchild, so I'm excited. Pam's excited. We're all
Hey.
excited.
Yep.
I
So-
think that if you're gonna do it,
Well, I don't know if I'll be here if she has the baby.
dude, what are you talking about? You can see the baby later.
Oh my God.
It's all
We'll
about
do-
Can we do
priorities.
FaceTime or something?
We'll do live from the
Yeah.
hospital
Yeah,
in the
live
waiting room.
about Manson.
Talking about Manson and making people uncomfortable in the waiting room. But yeah, we'll just have to see. So I mean, and if that's the case, if my daughter does have her baby, I'm probably guys, I won't be doing a show.
Yeah,
I'll
that'd be
be
good.
I'll be wanting to see my
Maybe I'll
grandson.
come over here and do like a short live or something.
Well,
I'll answer
why
some
don't we
questions.
just reschedule it?
We'll just reschedule.
I
I
mean-
just love being back in the seat, dude.
No, I know, but I'm not saying we can still do a show,
Can we
but
just ask Katie to wait?
but let's say yeah.
Yeah, I told her she couldn't do it this last weekend because I had those doubles.
Hey, can't do it Sunday either because we're gonna be blowing stuff up.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
4th of July, dude.
I
Can't
know.
wait. You know that's my favorite time of the year.
Oh, I know. Yeah, you
We-
still saved some stuff, didn't you, from last year?
I've been, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy because a Mustang. Well,
It's fine.
yeah, a Mustang in Oklahoma, you can
Dude.
pop fireworks in your front yard.
The
And
population.
there's
get,
no
like,
law against it.
Times 30,000, the population gets massive.
Yeah, it gets
Dude,
crazy. It gets
it's
loud
insane,
and
man.
crazy around here during
Yeah.
July the 4th. Well, even before that, I remember
Yeah.
when we lived in Mustang. Is like you could go outside. There was a neighbor of mine that literally he must have spent
Dude,
thousands
I
of
lived
dollars.
there, and he was amazing.
Yeah, it was like he popped stuff big explosion
I
every
love that
day.
guy, dude. I love him. Yeah, and he would like build a big wooden thing.
Yeah.
Like when we lived there, and he would light it on one end and would just go insane for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We'd be like just watching, like, is this thing gonna end?
Yeah, I
he was
mean,
cool. I like
and it was
him.
almost every day. This guy spent some thousands of
Dude,
dollars because
so
they
many
weren't
American flags.
They weren't. Yeah, they weren't like little Roman candles. They were the big artillery
Yeah.
shells.
That's what I'm getting this year.
Yeah,
Tons of them, dude.
times up.
America.
Yeah,
America.
Love 4th of July. Hey, good show.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ann. Dude.
Thanks very
Thank
much,
you
Ann.
So much, Ann.
That was very, very interesting, and I hope people will take heed. And is that the right word? Heed.
I think so. I
Okay.
think you're fine.
That they'll, if any of our members are thinking about joining a cult,
Yeah.
remember the checkoff list.
Yeah.
Or if you're in a cult,
Yeah,
go through the
please.
checkoff list.
Yeah, just Google 7 things that makes you a cult.
Exactly.
That's
All
it,
right.
dude.
Well, guys, if baby pending July the 6th is what we're looking
Awesome.
at. If my daughter does have a baby that day, I'll put out an announcement. We'll go ahead and probably do the show. I mean, if we can get Garrett over here.
Gotcha.
But
I love
yeah,
being back, dude. Good show, man.
yeah, it was a good
Good show,
show.
Pamela.
Thanks,
So
guys.
anyway, if I can, God, it's been so long, I forgot how to run this thing.
You just keep going live all night.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do a 24-hour.
Cool.
All right, you guys. Good night. We'll see you next week. From the high plains of the Midwest, I bid you good morning, good afternoon.